Before leaving, please remember to make a contribution to all of my thousands of hours of work here, PayPal, Patreon, or fundraiser in the description below or on the China Rising Radio Sinoland article page. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland on the D-Day beaches of Normandy. And I only have to go 2 hours east today. You can guess what that is from France. It happens to be Russia. And I am so pleased to have on the show today Tim Kirby. How are you doing, Tim?
Good. Just so you already knows about how I'm doing. You see the big lump on my head? I play American football here. I got my helmet knocked off and I got head-butted by another guy. So I'm a little beat up today. If anyone
well, both. I'm having to start wearing gloves in the house because I'm really suffering from the Raynaud effect, where my fingers turn white. So
I see.
We both have our bobos.
Yeah. So.
Anyway, Tim is a political analyst, radio talk show host, and semi-pro American football player. I will, on the China Rising Radio Sinoland page, list all. He's got all kinds of links here. He's I always admire people who offer their email. So he's happy for you to contact him. And I was just on his show a couple of days ago to talk about China from a Russian perspective, and I was so impressed with his hosting job. I said, well, let me get you on my show to talk about Russia, maybe from a Chinese perspective. So thank you for coming on the show, Tim.
It is my pleasure.
Well, listen, first off, everybody out there is going to be asking, tell us why, when, and for how long you have been in Russia.
Well, I wrote a whole book about it, but unfortunately I never translated it. Maybe that's something I need to get around to. But it's kind of a big answer. I would say that it's also an answer where it kind of changes with time. But I can tell you one thing. When you grow up in Cleveland, right, but there's a bit of a crisis of identity. I grew up in a poor black neighborhood in Cleveland, right? And that's the culture I was raised in. But obviously, if you look at me, that's unfortunately the culture that I don't look like whatsoever physically. And it creates kind of a problem, right? Because basically, if you look like I do, or I should say maybe we do, you're not wanted there. You're never going to be part of the team. You're the enemy or whatever. Not to the majority of people. But, when 80% of the people are generally pretty kind to you, but 20% are pretty bigotous, you encounter that 20% a lot. But then the opposite was sort of this whole like white picket fences, emasculated suburbia. No, I really didn't like the alternative to that, because Russians always ask me, well, if you didn't really like Cleveland, wouldn't you just go somewhere else? And it's like, well, not where I'm from. That's not the culture. I was raised in a culture that definitely respected more masculinity, more, what should I call it? A lot less regard for rules and all that. And you know what? Russia kind of lines up with that. And all my ancestors came from Eastern Europe, so I thought I'd give it a try and see if I'm an Eastern European person. And I'm not really sure. I'm kind of a hybrid of all three, but I think life here works for me.
Great. When did you move there?
The end of 2006. So that's like 15 years ago.
Oh, wow. So, okay. All right. Really, really
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kazakhstan before that. So I essentially kind of left America in about 2004. I sort of got sentimental for some of like my buddies and all that. But one thing is, if you have some younger viewers, I'll tell you one thing. By the time you're 25 or 30, all your friendships fall apart. This happens to pretty much everyone. Coming back to America to hang out with my bros was a bad choice, although they are great people. But everyone kind of started to live their own lives and find girls and all that other stuff. And yeah.
Interesting. Well, I was in the Peace Corps in Tunisia from 1980 to 82, so I didn't know that you were in RPCB.
Oh, really? Fantastic! Yeah,
we're brothers in that respect. Do you recommend immigrating to Russia, and is it hard or necessary to get Russian citizenship?
Well, first off, that first question is I don't think that's the kind of thing that's sort of a universal answer. There are some things that I could tell people are a good idea universally about Russia. Like if you're going to Russia and you can, real estate. The taxes are so low. If you make money in dollars or euros, you can buy a lot here. That's pretty universal. That's now, should someone want to live here, that's really up to them. That depends what they want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because sometimes I'm always surprised at certain people who do come here. Because look, I don't know, maybe it's kind of obvious from again from the way my face looks and all that all my ancestors came from like at the time of the Russian Revolution, they all came from within the Russian Empire, right?
Okay. All right.
So that's one thing. That's an ethnic thing. I come back here as long as my mouth is shut. I'm just like everybody else. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I've been to, I know French people who have come here, a couple people who are black who've come here, black American, not like Africa black. Uh, Trying to think who else. I've met a Turkish guy who loves it here. And that's one thing where I've always been kind of interested because they're kind of going somewhere where they're very different. And that differentness
Mm-hmm.
is sort of impossible to hide.
Mm-hmm.
Because someone might think, well, if you're French, but French people look very, very, very physically different from Slavs. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you're French, everyone's always going to also be looking at you like, are you foreign? Who are you? What's the deal with you? And whatever. So, for those people, I don't know, but I can tell you things that they sort of like about being here is they pretty much everyone who comes here likes the amount of freedom you have. But again, freedom is related to how much you agree with society. So I think they finally found a society where they maybe agree with the way the rules of the game are played. Some people like the girls and all that. Some people definitely like, again, the real estate market. Some people like the fact that in Russia, most people here, the overwhelming majority of people here don't want to do anything. So in some ways, you could become very successful in Russia due to a complete lack of competition.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe
Very, very
I think that's kind of
interesting.
changing with the new generation coming up. They're a bit more optimistic about their opportunities and abilities. But especially when I got here, I mean, it's just sort of like the road's open for you. Do whatever you want because no one wants to do anything. We have a very sort of medieval society still here. So in some ways, yeah. So there are definitely some advantages, but it all depends on you. It's sort of like it's what do people want? What kind of life are they looking for? Because I do a lot of consultations about this very question, and it all depends what they want.
Well, thank you for the free advice for all the fans out there.
Yeah.
Well, listen, let's start off at the top. I mean, lots of stuff in the media right now about Russia. Tell us how you see Russia's place in the world today vis-a-vis Western imperialism.
Well, the question is sort of what kind of imperialism? I think the sort of traditional imperialism of we send guys in red coats with pith helmets over to Africa to take control of something. Those days are over, but we can definitely see that there is this more invisible reach that, despite the fact that, uh, you know, Russia is supposedly having a conservative revolution. We've still got Facebook here and we've got TikTok. And, my kids have already asked me about trannies and lesbians and all that, but it's the way it is. And, and there's always, you can definitely see that politics is very influenced by these sort of big international corporations, especially here in Russia. There's definitely a lot of pull and a lot of influence. So, I would say there's some sort of imperialism or maybe colonization of Russia, we could call it, because there's a particular movement in Russia called the uh, National Liberation Movement, in translation, NOD, NOD in Russian. And their big thing is they really want to change the Russian constitution to get rid of its colonial nature, get all that out of it, and try to clean Russia of all the politicians who are very who almost behave in a colonial way. And there's a lot of truth to that, because until recently, until the referendum of 2020 in the Russian Constitution, it was written that international law is superior to Russian law.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, that sounds something very strong from a Western standpoint. It's something they shouldn't have in the Constitution. But remember, Russians don't care about rules. So on the one hand, that may have been, but how often was it followed? But at least it's gone now, and that's I'll put it this way: it's always good to have your morals, your I don't know, basically get your house in order and not have that kind of
Mm-hmm.
garbage there. There are actually a lot of changes to the Russian Constitution, but they were sort of overshadowed by the re-zeroing of Putin's opportunity to take president. If you want, I have them somewhere saved on the computer, and I can open them up real quick. But that was a pretty big change there. But so, anyways, there's definitely, you can feel in Russia that even to this day, a lot of the loyalties of a lot of the politicians are questionable. There is a lot of interaction between a lot of business and people in the government between them and the West. So who's on whose side? Who's actually really going to, when the chips are down, who's going to fight for whom is always a pretty open question, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Why does that's very interesting, and I love following Russia, and it's so big and so huge and so important historically today and for tomorrow, um, next question:
Oh,
why
wait,
does
one thing, let me jump. I forgot to mention
go
that one
ahead.
thing that probably is kind of important. I was thinking internally, externally, obviously, the whole thing about this deflating Syria and sort of blocking that was a major sort of blow to this again, trying to stir up all this chaos and all that in the Middle East. We have these how the sort of alliance between Russia, Kazakhstan. We had Armenia in there and Kyrgyzstan. They came in to deflate the color revolution in Kazakhstan. So yeah, Russia, I would say, is, if there's anyone who's really the big resistor of this, let's not call it imperialism, maybe monopolar world order, the monopolar structure. It is Russia, because they're the ones who even conceived the idea of how we could live in the opposite sense, and the different sense being the multipolar world order, and are the big advocates for it, and are generally the ones who have sort of moved their pieces around the chessboard to sort of stop it. So in that sense, yes, Russia is very much fighting this sort of structure, but you have to remember that anyone who's in a sort of revolutionary position, right? If they're a communist in a capitalist country, then they're going to have to live in a capitalist system and behave by its rules until they get the revolution, or the reverse. If they're a capitalist in a communist country, they have to play by the Communist Party's rules until they can get the revolution and change things. And so in some ways, Russia's very much stuck in that context of still being stuck in this monopolar world structure while at the same time fighting it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
See?
That's for sure. Thank goodness.
Mm.
I couldn't imagine Russia, the world today without China, Russia,
Mm.
and later on I'll get to Iran and North Korea. But anyway, yeah, thank you for that. Why does every Russian citizen I've met outside the country say bad things about Putin? And I've met many of them, in spite of all he has done for his people and their country's place in the world, especially compared to 1990 to 2000.
Well, it also kind of depends when they left. You know, I know this type of person too. And when you leave somewhere, your memory of it kind of gets cut off. So I left Cleveland forever. You know, that's around early 2000s. And so, even to be honest, because I went to college in Pittsburgh and all that, my perception of Cleveland is the 1990s. And it's no matter what people say or what I see, I can only really remember the 90s there, right? And I think that can be also what's happening for a lot of these people who did leave during the Russian 90s, or the sort of the Yeltsin period, is it's kind of hard for them to believe that maybe things could be different, because they're cut off from that new evolutionary path. They're now in a different evolutionary path. I can tell you from personal experience with one person I know who were pretty good friends, but this person is very critical of Russia, there's just certain things that about Russian culture that she just hates. She hates how no one smiles. She can't get over it. And we've had the argument a million times. I've said, in America, but the smiling is fake, or it's part of your job. It sort of doesn't mean anything. She says, I don't care. I want to live in a place full of smiles. Okay. There's nothing you can say about that, or the occasional Russian person who says they hate the weather there. But essentially, yeah, it's kind of like, it's the leaving in the 1990s. It's the fact that if they really left Russia, that means they must just, in general, not like the way things work here. And maybe they probably like the way things work in Europe. I know people who, Canada is the stereotype of being boring, right? But there are Russian people who've moved to Canada that I've spoken to, and they love it. Why? Because it's boring. Because the money doesn't really shake around. Everything's kind of predictable. It's essentially, humanity's sort of always in this desire for something different. If you grow up in a really stable, boring environment, you want something exciting.
Yeah.
If you want if you grow up in a war-torn area, you want totalitarian boredom. You want Canada with a cop on every corner that will beat you if your grass gets too long. And I think so. It's a little bit of that. I'll also put it this way. I've also met a lot of Russians who've come back because they went to the West. They had one perception of things. They're like, you know what? Let's go back home. One thing I do have to also tell you is that the whole Putin thing, when it comes to foreigners, it's really also foreigners who are obsessed with Putin. Within Russia, obviously, he's the most famous politician. People know him, but he doesn't really have a cult of personality. Okay. Like there are leaders where, Mao's Red Book is, I think you mentioned when we talk, is still being read. It's very influential.
Millions sold every year.
Yeah. Before they murdered Gaddafi, he had his own sort of ideological musings, and he was very much that kind of cult of personality leader. Not that that's a bad thing, because again, when someone speaks English and you say that, it almost sounds like an insult. It's not. You could also say that, who's a good example? Barack Obama, because I would say he was sort of had the flavor of a cult of personality. He definitely had his hope and change, and he had people who were pretty into him. They didn't really need to understand who he was. They just liked his charisma factor. But you also didn't have like Obamists who would force you must read the Obama book, or this policy must be done because the great Obama said so. In some ways, that's actually kind of how Putin more is within Russia. He doesn't have Putinists, because you'll read in Western media that there's Putinism. There is no such Putinism. If there is some kind of Putinism, it's a commitment usually to conservatism and pragmatism. And in fact, that's kind of one of the problems is there is no ideology in Russia. We're a little bit kind of a boat without a rudder here. Again, this the real obsession with Putin tends to happen a lot more so with foreign people than within the country.
Yeah, well, there's Trump derangement syndrome, and apparently there's also Putin derangement syndrome.
Yeah, I think people can really put too much into it. Also, Putin is not a dictator, and I'll tell you why. Because he cannot get everything done and he wants to. A lot of his executive orders don't get filled. They don't get done.
Yeah.
So in some ways, Putin also has the real trouble of he has to maintain this air that he is in control. Everything's fine. We're moving forward, because in an information war, if the leader goes on TV and says, we have a problem, or I said for these people to do this and they didn't do it, there are certain contexts, and they didn't do it, then he seems weak, bad for the country. So in a lot of ways, Putin is essentially stuck being a president when he actually kind of would need to be a dictator to really be able to change things. So that's one of the other things that's very damaging is he always gets accused of being a dictator when he's actually really stuck in the swamp that is the Western democratic model. Like I forget what George Bush said. I'm terrible at quotes, but didn't he say this would be a lot easier if I was a dictator?
Yeah. George W. Bush. Yeah, absolutely.
So Putin's like that. Also, anyways, you get my point, I think.
Well, lots of time and space before he leaves office, but what's your best case prediction about what will happen post-Putin?
Well, there's not that much time. I think the next election is 2024, if I'm not
Yeah, it's
mistaken. I could be
2
wrong about that. It
years.
could be 26. But the problem is no one knows because it all depends on who takes power after him. Because one of the great problems in the history of Russia has been the transition of power. Because when you have someone who's really a great leader, great in the sense of being massive, maybe you might particularly not agree with them, but the historical greatness, right? It's very hard for someone to follow that. And if you look at Russian history, again, someone might hate Stalin, but he was a massive figure. And it's inarguable to deny that Russia really pushed forward hard under his leadership in a particular direction, whether someone likes that or not. A lot was accomplished. Some may feel that the accomplishments were not in the right direction. That's up to you, okay? But after him was Khrushchev, or Khrushchev, as he's called in Russian. Khrushchev. But anyways, Khrushchev was a massive, massive failure. He really abandoned everything that Stalin accomplished, and he even really got rid of basically, Russians believe that Stalin was setting up the system that the Chinese have now, and that Khrushchev ruined Russia's chance to become today's China. Okay? So that's where that goes. Let's take another example from history. We have the Time of Troubles, which was after the death of Ivan IV, who was not called terrible in Russian. He was called something more like intimidating. So Ivan the Intimidating, the fourth, after his death, he was really, unfortunately, he had a ton of kids, but they're all losers apparently, and he was really unable to continue his succession. And after his massive, massive greatness, the big slump, right? That was another one. We could also even say that some of the leaders of like the 1800s, you're looking at what would that be? Alexander the Third, Nikolai the First, that kind of big leadership. But then came Nicholas the Second, who essentially just kind of sat there and let the empire be taken away from him. So really, one of the key problems is finding Russia's a big, great country that demands great leadership. And how the heck do you find the next Ivan the Fourth, or a Alexander Nevsky, or a another Putin, or a Stalin, or whoever? They don't grow on trees. You can't buy them at the supermarket. So in a lot of ways, the future of Russia really depends on who is going to get the call. I thought that they might go with Shoigu because he's actually extremely popular as the Minister of
The
Defense,
Minister of Defense,
but
yeah.
he's not really particularly younger than Putin. So I don't know. He might become sort of a more patriotic intermediary, but one of the other problems is he's not ethnically Russian, so that kind of
He's
puts a little bit of
he's
a
from
can
the
of
Far
beans.
East, yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I would love to like a lot of people who are sort of Russia watchers and observers, modern Sovietologists, they love to predict the future without knowing anything. And I can tell you one thing: when we don't know who's going to take over after Putin, it's really hard to predict the future. If it was Medvedev again, I can tell you what the future is. Give up. Because Medvedev, unfortunately, although he's been very successful in his political career, I think that's because he's very agreeable. And whoever's sort of talking the loudest, he'll agree with. And whoever's talking loudest is generally Western politicians. So there you go. So a Medvedev 2.0 is probably not going to happen because you already saw that when that happened, it just didn't work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think he is classified as an Atlanticist, that he's more pro-Western than more pro-Western than Russian nationalists.
Well, again,
So
there are certain people who have beliefs, and there are certain people who have a lack of beliefs, and it makes them do things. I think really it's Medvedev who's more that kind of politician. I don't quite understand why some people like that get into politics, maybe for the money or something. But again, if he was in a room and 10 people said we need some Maoist policies, I think he'd go, yeah, I can kind of see that.
yeah.
It's really just a matter of who's in the room with them. Which also makes him too dangerous in a sense to be at the top of the chain.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
more of your bean counter type of position with the people with that mentality.
Thank you. Very interesting. I understand that in spite of 10 years of rape and plunder during the Yeltsin era, Russia still has a big socialist footprint in terms of government-owned and or subsidized services, as well as a number of key industries, partially or fully government-owned. Please tell us about that, because I've heard everything. Oh no, no, no. You know, I know you're an informed source, so please tell us about that.
Okay, well, I wish it was in English, but there's a good video where this guy describes how Russia has a system that he calls state capitalism. And this is, I think, where the gray line comes from. So, anyways, what does state capitalism sort of look like? Well, we have the concept of private property here, although in a sense, the concept of private property is false. Right. So during communism, you have personal property. Your TV is yours, but all like real estate, all your land and all that, goes to the government and they sort of allocate where you live, although you feel like you're there. Private property gives us the illusion that we own what we do, but not really in a sense, even in both America and Russia, if you own a home or land or whatever, essentially, you can't sell that land to the Chinese government. You can't turn it into your own little country. There's a lot of restrictions on what you can do with it, which really means that you're essentially sort of like a medieval lord over your 100 square meters of land, or well, that's not much land. Russia, the smallest parcel of land they usually sell is 600 square meters. So you're the lord over that fiefdom of 600 square meters. So and in Russia, we definitely have that sort of medieval land owning structure. Again, some people consider medieval to be an insult. I do not. There's a lot of positives to the medieval period that just got crapped on by liberals in the 1800s. So that's kind of the structure we have there. So we don't have something where everyone is like assigned a place to live by the party. Okay, we don't have that. There are a lot of government programs though to give away land for free. Like every Russian citizen is entitled to land if they want it, but most of the times that land is terrible and it's in the state that they reside in. So if you want to, and if you have the gusto, you could, if you're in oh gosh, I don't know where, Tiva, where Shoigu is from, right? You're there. You could go to the government. Hey, I got nowhere to live. Could you give me some land? And they'll give you a piece of land, and like between two mountains, 10 miles from a town, but it'll be yours, and you can build whatever the heck you want there and live there, which I think is incredibly freeing. So there is some responsibility on the side of the government to kind of take care of people. After communism, right? Who takes care of all the communist apartment buildings? The government. So like your apartment, you own, again, in that medieval sense of owning, but like the stairwells and the elevators and all that are maintained by the government, but they're maintained by the government via these small little corporations called ZKH, which is I don't even know what to call it in English. I don't know. It's like basically the government pays these people to do it. So this is how we're getting to the state capitalism. There's all different ones, and they kind of compete with each other for tenders and all that sort of stuff. But the government all organizes it. We have the socialized medicine here. So, if you have a bullet in your leg, they'll pull it out. There are definitely some problems with it, but obviously it's better to have something than nothing. Taxes aren't very high in Russia, so I don't have a problem with it. But of course, you can get called extra insurance, which is like the insurance we have in America, where you can go and get a private insurance policy. Nothing stopping you from that. And there is nothing stopping you from starting or going to a private clinic, which is usually, to be honest, what I do, because it's just faster. Through my main job, I actually have that extra insurance on top of socialized medicine. So I usually do that. It's faster and better. Or like my daughter had surgery recently, and I could have did it for free, but I could also get the sort of Lux service package, throw for $400 on it, and you get a room by yourself and all this other stuff, and all the doctors want to chit chat with you and kiss your butt and all that. Right? So there's that. Of course, education here is free also. However, there's this new horrible policy where you have to pass a test to be able to get into universities and study for free. So the amount of free education here is dwindling especially due to this testing system, which a lot of people aren't particularly happy with. But I would say it's not a huge problem because the concept of higher education is kind of falling apart as is. And I don't think it's particularly necessary for a lot of professions going into the 21st century. And I think, in fact, we need to get people out into the workforce faster and faster rather than later and later. We could talk about that if you want. But I think, especially for men, when you're 16, you should be out doing something, not screwing around in academia that yields not a lot of profit till you're 24 or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
did that kind of cover a general thing about some of the aspects
Yeah.
of socialism?
What about some of the heavy industry? Like what about shipping, airports, mining, petroleum, nuclear? Was that all privatized, or is there still a lot of?
Well, it's kind of a mix, and some things have been unprivatized. I believe there's some places they do. Was it magnesium? I believe actually got taken back. So it's kind of like certain things are so protected that if it's basically too big to fail, rather than being propped up, it just gets grabbed by the government to go back, which is a little bit of a difference between Russia and America. But I can tell you one thing: as someone who worked in the media, I know for sure because I've seen the numbers. And how does the media work? Well, there's all these different, radio stations, TV channels, different media organizations that the Russian government supports. The Ministry of Culture is supposed to it's usually the Ministry of Culture. And they're supposed to, oh no, they're movies. I think it's a different ministry that's actually the news. But anyways, it doesn't matter. They get all their money from the government, but they're essentially run like a corporation where they are given a budget and they have to use that budget. They sort of appeal for a budget. The government gives them the budget, but they're generally allowed to make money and profit and grow within certain rules. Okay. So that's something very different than, say, communism that was in Soviet communism. Like in Soviet communism, you couldn't just like start trying to make cash on the side, right? So that's why you can see advertising on Russia Today. You can on the radio station where I worked for many, many years, definitely had a lot of ad campaigns. So yeah, and that ad revenue can and often is shared with the employees. However, the percentage is a bit low, in my opinion. But yeah, so it's kind of an interesting system. The only thing that's really a flaw with it is that generally, if you're, say you're using the budget and say you're actually kind of generating profit, well, then you don't really need the budget money anymore. But if you don't use the budget money, they don't give it to you anymore.
Use it or
So
lose
that
it.
is, it does create this one sort of syndrome where all these, especially like, again, I'm talking about the media because that's what I know for sure from the inside. Every media company in Russia is going to try to use 99.9% of that budget. So just to make sure they have it for next year and somehow, and then the advertising money, put that on top of that. So that way everyone can have their pockets padded a little bit, or maybe invest in, new chairs or whatever, and all that stuff. So
Interesting.
yeah.
There are lots of predictions that
One
Russia.
thing. Sorry, I forgot.
Go ahead.
One thing that's also important is that one of the political parties here, Just Russia, they have been for years trying to get the Russian government to sort of give out everyone a small amount of, the natural resources that Russia exports. During the last election cycle, they wanted to give everyone 10,000 rubles. I think that's like $150. Not a whole lot, but I think it would help certain people. That's one thing that's also, it's been on the table for years, but it just never quite goes through, to get there. But I think that would be something that would definitely be interesting and be helpful if people got sort of a cut of things. And as I've gone to, we've filmed different companies that do metal and mining and all that. And I can say that also is, although there's government support, and again, you have these sort of like state capitalism, we have these companies that are kind of sort of owned by the government, but they kind of operate on their own and very complex structures and all that. The salaries a lot of these places are not too bad, but they're not great. And I think that if the government, their function is to provide a bit of a service back to the population, these salaries are lacking. The only people I've ever said who really had good jobs were the guys who do, like those giant cranes they use for mining. Those guys make, by Russian standards, absolutely fantastic money. Because one time we were on a train coming back from somewhere far away. The problem is, so that way they behave themselves, they get paid only as they're leaving in cash. So imagine this, guys, because in Russia, people don't make that much money. If you look at the national average, it's kind of pathetic. But remember, there's a lot of people who do subsistence farming, and so it's a little bit skewed. But anyways, these guys are getting like $5,000 cash in hand at the end of the month before they have to, they do like a month on, month off. That was a wild train ride. I'll put it this way. They're not allowed to drink or anything for that whole month. Oh, boy. So party time. Yeah.
There are lots of predictions that Russia is going to take back Ukraine if U.S., NATO, and the OSCE do not disavow expanding further towards her borders. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, about what is going to happen, this is one thing. For some reason, every sort of like Western person, native English speaker who talks about politics in Russia, we're a big club, we're an ever-growing club. Maybe that's not good for my future, too much competition. But a lot of my, I'll call them colleagues, have been way too cowardly to just say that, yeah, Russia would like to take the Ukraine back. Oh, yeah. I mean, Ukraine is the birthplace of Russia. It's like the whole Israel-Palestine thing. You know what I mean? It's the motherland to both sides. Okay. So on that level, yeah, Russia would like to take it back. Would Russia start World War III over it? Probably not. Putin and Russia, as it stands today, tend to be very reactive. Remember what happened in Syria? That was a reaction. What happened in Kazakhstan, I mentioned, reaction. All the sanctions issued from Russia are counter sanctions. Everything is essentially a very reactive waiting game. Maybe you could say attrition type of strategy here. So the idea that the Russian political elite, Putin himself, the way things are, would just one day up and say, launch, let's take it. No, that's just not going to happen, because that's not the way they operate. But would they like to take the Ukraine back? Yes. If they wanted to take the Ukraine, they needed to have done that in 2014 during the chaos. Just take it, because essentially that's what happened. The Crimea had a referendum, and it went back home. They could have just organized the same thing. Yes, technically the Crimea was an independent, semi-independent republic with a different legal status than every other place in Ukraine. So it was kind of an exception. And 90-some+% of the population was sure to vote to go back home. And in some other places, it might be 80%. So that would, 70 or 80% would vote to go back to Russia. So it'd create, some people would say, well, that would be too messy. It would. Russia kind of had the chance and lost it in 2014. At this point, I really don't think that they're going to do it, because it's essentially like start World War III, get the Ukraine back. Yes, Russia really does need the Ukraine back. You may have not heard this, but it's very popular to say within Russia. In fact, it's a cliche. In his writings, Zbigniew Brzezinski said that Russia will never be a superpower again without the Ukraine. And in a lot of ways, that is true, because if Russia were able to take back the Ukraine, Russia is already a farming massive powerhouse, which is kind of hard to believe.
That's unbelievable.
That's another thing too.
The world's biggest grain exporter now. It's unbelievable.
Well, yeah. In the 1990s, America exported chicken legs that they called the bush legs to Russia, and now Russia's actually been exporting food back to America because America can't cut it. So big changes over 30 years. But anyways, with that, I kind of lost my train of thought here. Oh yeah, with Ukraine, that really could almost be like a global monopoly on food.
Because it's a bread basket of Russia.
Oh yeah, well, it's the bread basket of everywhere. Because if you there's only a few places on Earth that could actually, in one sort of central location, provide complete food domination of the world. Number one, you have some of the plains of Argentina. Argentina has a whole lot of beef and a whole lot of grain and a whole lot of everything. Good for them. You have the American Midwest, Go Rust Belt. Yeah, we can do it. We can feed the world. And you have like Ukraine, southern Russia. So that essentially means there are these, we talk about oil, we talk about all these different resources, but we forget there are really three locations on Earth that if you were able to control all three, you could essentially start some sort of totalitarian food nightmare. But if you control one, your country cannot be dirt poor ever again. Russia had some problems because during the transition to communism, I've been able to talk to people about that, and the way the farming system was run was just terrible. A lot of mistakes, a lot of goofiness, a lot of people running it who didn't know anything about farming. But given the sort of freedom to think that Russia has today, and a bit of privatization, Russia's become this farming powerhouse. And with Ukraine, essentially, it could compete with the United States or certainly Argentina. And of course, that's another layer towards becoming a superpower again. So the Ukraine also really offers that. And also, just like I said, it's the birthplace of Russia. Russia traces all the lines of all the tsars and everything back to Kiev, was sort of really where this Eastern Slavic civilization really started.
Yeah, absolutely. Grover, thank you. That's really interesting. Grover Furr has written a number of books about the Soviet era, especially focused, and you kind of got into this, but I think this is really an important thing to talk about a little bit more in detail. And Grover says that no one can get published in the Western mainstream media unless they agree that Stalin and Lenin were monstrous mass murderers who destroyed the country. And Furr disagrees with these interpretations based on exhaustive research in the now released Soviet archives. And of course, he speaks, reads, and writes, fluent Russian. How are impressions about these two critical leaders in Russia's modern history evolving, especially since the fall of communism, the 1990s, and Yeltsin, and now with 20 years post Yeltsin? How are they evolving in the minds of the people?
Well, we have to remember that with the Western, mainstream media and social media, I mean, the president of the United States, the 45th president of the United States, was canceled. He's been booted off of a lot of social media. So it's not just your opinions on Lenin or Stalin that matter. Trust me. It's a wide range of topics that'll get you the big ban hammer. I'm someone, that's why you can't see me on Facebook or Instagram anymore, because I'm a naughty boy with naughty beliefs. Now, if we're talking about the legacy of Lenin and Stalin, they're very different. Lenin, very often it's discussed of whether they want to get rid of his body from Red Square. Why? Because essentially Lenin, when he started the revolution, there's a growing belief that he really set back the country, or at least he acted in a lot of self-interests. He seemed to not particularly care, him and the Trotsky. It's essentially the Trotskyite versus Stalin position on everything. Because in Russia, all communism is, you have the Stalin side of things and the Trotskyite side of things. The Trotskyite side of things are more your, it's more like the way the West interprets the way communism needs to be, where you sort of burn everything down. Well, I mean, that's Trotsky's famous expression that Russia would be the firewood of revolution. It's just a fuel source to fuel revolution and nothing more. Whereas Stalin was sort of happy to have the revolution end and build up Russia. So Stalin definitely gets a lot more of a historical pass because he took chaos, brought order, built up the country. Like I said before, some people believe he had things well on the way to building this sort of Chinese system. You also have to remember that the Tsars ultimately failed to do certain things, especially like housing. So, you had an entire generation of people who grew up under the Tsar and then went through, 1920s, the horrors of the revolution. And then somewhere around the 1930s, 1940s, especially then after World War II, all of a sudden, all over the country appeared apartments that have centralized heating. And, you have people who, literally were going from like dirt floor homes. In fact, I've met people who went from dirt floor home living to washing machine, heating, electric lighting, kind of sit around and do nothing lifestyle. And so that was very appealing to a lot of people. And Stalin has contributed to that. Also, the difference is Lenin crushed Christianity. There's a belief that the Eastern Orthodox Church would really thought that they'd be able to, because they are in a symbiosis with the government, they were never part of it, that, well, maybe this Tsar thing is over, but we can work in tandem with the communists and we'll keep going. No, 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 no. But Stalin, during World War II, actually brought really religion back, and he brought the Eastern Orthodox tradition back under the structure that it was in before the reforms of Peter I. So in a lot of ways, people feel that he actually saved Christianity from extinction here. So that's another big bonus point for him. He won World War II, which is another big bonus point for him there. So I would say that his legacy is much, much more solid than Lenin's. I think Lenin is definitely, when some of the more older generation who remembers being brought up with this sort of very favorable view of Lenin, when they fade away into history, I think Lenin is probably he's really on the way out. Again, he's being perceived as being selfish, not acting in the interests of Russia, of creating this revolution without really much plans as to what to do after it. Whereas Stalin really took all sort of the mistakes of Lenin and went in and sort of fixed everything. So
yeah.
And also, one of the other things is, remember, Stalin is very famous in the West as this sort of brutal tyrant, but in Russia, he's remembered for being brutal towards the elite. Where generally, if you think about it, well, who was really on Stalin's hit list? It was the people that we, as normies, feel helpless to do anything against. And in some ways, I think for a lot of people, that was something where he has this "he's our guy" kind of thing. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the same thing with Mao. I mean, the Cultural Revolution was basically direct democracy to take down the elites. And so the only people we hear about, in the West from the Cultural Revolution are those elites.
Yeah.
who write all the books that they read, in the West. And so that's why he's still popular in China, as I guess Stalin still has lots of fans too.
Well, yeah,
so,
and of course, and that's the same thing with the Russian Revolution. There were winners and losers. The losing side were the White Russians, who all fled to the West. To some extent, that probably affected my family history. And they all went to Europe, and they were all bitter, and they were all angry, and they were happy to exaggerate whatever they want. It's like I said, there's a lot of historical bias that goes on through history, and when you have this revolution that shoves half of the elite out, that elite is going to be bitter, but they're still going to live very good lifestyles. They're going to write books and work at universities and this, that, and the other. Or how everyone tells me that in a lot of major, American universities, you have sort of salty, like Estonians, Latvians, Western Ukrainians who are all angry at Russia, where the people who get to be sort of like Sovietologist, Russiaologists, if that's even a word, Russologist, maybe that's the better sounding word. So you definitely have this sort of, I don't know, is that be confirmation bias?
Yeah.
Going on. But I think that that's unfortunately just kind of a natural part of history. Like I mentioned earlier, now that we have the ability to really listen to a lot of lectures from historians, the medieval period wasn't as brutal as people say. And there's something actually very human about this concept of feudalism, which is, again, another dirty word. But why is it a dirty word? Because in the Victorian era, during the height of like where liberalism and the rights of the individual and all this is growing, they were disgusted by the medieval period and by monarchy. And so they just, when they're given the chance, they just sort of crapped on it for generation after generation. And now we have this sort of opinion that medieval times were just, I don't know, one big sort of death camp, and it's not really in fact, not really, it's not even close to the way it was. I would say that this whole feudal system was almost like a system of everyone knowing whom they have to take care of in this sort of bigger arching framework. Of course, there was a lot of exploitation going on. Sometimes the feudal lords would say, "Hey, you have to mill your grain at my mill," and the serf would ask, "Hey, why?" "Because I'm the lord, and why don't you pay me 3%?" There was definitely part of that, which is not exactly very caring in Care Bears and My Little Pony, but again, the insanity and of the Victorian era rewriting of the medieval times, I think, is very bad for us because, again, as people who speak English and are of a European physical appearance, it's taken away. It's taken away a lot of our history. It's really robbed us of some insights that we could probably use. So,
thank you. How do Russians view the China? This is obviously a multi-layered question, but Chinese, North Koreans, and Iranians together, which I like to call the anti-Western imperialist Asian Quad.
yeah.
So what do the Russians think about these neighbors that border their country, and does it differ from the West, Russian West to the Asian East?
Well, it definitely it matters a little bit when you're in the Asian East because you see the realities of it. There are certain possibly State Department funded channels, channels in the sense of not like TV channel, but like ways of throwing around money that seem to propagate certain myths. One myth is that there's no forest left. It's all been sold to China. That's not true. I've been all over there. Yes, we export a lot of wood, but it is actually heavily regulated. And even if the regulations are corrupt and they're doing twice or three times as much as they should be, even at that rate, it would take thousands and thousands of years for Russia to deforest. It's cool. That's also one thing where I think GMOs are actually going to be a positive. Even as a child, I thought, is there some way they can make it so trees grow faster? I think that's already happening. But anyways, so this whole thing that there's no trees is BS. But Russians get pumped full of it, and a lot of people are naive, and they're in the concrete jungle of Moscow, and they believe it. That's number one. And of course, it's the Chinese fault that they want to make stuff. It's because remember, it's always this thing where they want to do the subtle propaganda that it's because of China that we don't have trees. The West uses trees too. The construction materials crisis in America has created a construction materials crisis in Russia. Why? Because all the Russian construction materials go to America. But that saying it's because of the Americans, they never say that. Interesting why. Sort of big myth number two is that China has essentially population-wise already moved into the eastern part of Russia, and Russians are going to be the minority soon. I have been to a town called Slavyanka. Find it on the map. It is extremely close to North Korea. Everyone there was Slavic. There is no Chinese invasion. Everyone in Vladivostok who has kind of a sort of Asian appearance are all from the Korean immigration wave that took place when Korea was sort of under the Japanese yoke, and a lot of them fled to the Russian Empire. So that's one thing, humanitarian side of things is that the Russians actually let a lot of Koreans flee here, which also generally means that they are all very bitter at Japan. Because all of them sort of like, hey, you're Korean, why are you in Russia? Because of Japanese oppression. So they're very bitter about that. I can tell you that much. But anyway, so they don't have accents, obviously. They've been here for 4 generations, and a lot of people are now, mixed race or whatever. So there is no Chinese invasion. It's just not true. It's just false. Yeah, so there's that. I thought that might be relevant if you have any
thank you. It's real. I didn't know that, so I'm glad to hear. What about the North Koreans and the Iranians?
About China as a culture, again, so there's this propaganda saying fear China, fear China, fear China. But there's definitely, I'll put it this way. There's a self-hating Russians. There's a lot of self-hating Russians. It is the number one factor that holds Russia back is this culture of self-hatred. Now, when you have the self-hating pro-Western Russian, everything's better. They have democracy. We're awful. Putin's a dictator. Everything there's better. People smile and are caring. They have that BS, right? Now, when you have a self-hating Russian of more of a different, maybe they're not true self-hatred, but they're really, they don't, but the Chinese know what to do. If we would have just stayed the course with Stalin, we'd be like the Chinese. The Chinese are so much better than us. We're failures. So there is a bit of a culture of that, but it's not super popular. But there is definitely something I could call, what Russians call white envy. Envy leads to sort of hating people like, look at that asshole. He's got so much money. Me. Then there's sort of like this envy like, wow, Michael Jordan was the best basketball player ever. I'm going to practice every day and I'll grow up to be the best basketball player too. That's called white envy in Russia. And I would say that towards China, there's a lot of white envy when they see, how much stuff is being built in China, how many high-speed rail and all that. Because you definitely see a lot of memes in Russia. Like, we do have some high-speed rail here, but the tempo is just it doesn't compare, And so people are kind of like, well, they can do it. Come on, let's go. So in some ways, we can even see that there's a little bit of a cultural debate of like a sort of pro-Westerner versus pro-Chinese way of looking at, how we should really do things here. So China is pretty relevant, but I would still say pretty mysterious. The amount of contact between Russia and China is increasing, but I would definitely say that cultural contact is China's still far away. When it comes to North Korea, I don't really know what to say. I can tell you one thing. I just did an interview recently with someone who is convinced that given the chance, North Korea would want to become part of the Russian Federation. Not so sure about that. I think they're kind of happy with the Korean Peninsula being Korean. But
they're too nationalist and too independent.
I don't think so. But I can tell you, there's a big difference. No one cares here. If they want to have Juche or Chuche, I think it's called in Russian. A lot of different pronunciations for that. If that's what they want to do, that's their business. And that's a big difference between, say, American perspective and Russian. People here do not care. Whatever they want to do over there, knock yourselves out. That's your problem.
Yeah, Juche is self-reliance in Korean. So for the fans out there, what about Iran?
Iran is always projected. I don't know if this is by chance or by some maybe manipulation, but Iran is always portrayed as our good partners. If there's anyone we can make a deal with, it's the Iranians. They're people who keep their word, and they're the best partners a guy could have. So this very positive, I would say a very positive view of Iran as, being this country of traditions and a country where they keep their word, and we can all, basically if you say, hey, Iranian guy, let me borrow $100, I'll pay you back, or I should say, Iranian guy asks you to borrow $100, and he says, I'll pay you back in a week. The Iranian guy, he'll pay you back in a week for sure, because he's Iranian and he's reliable. I would say that that's kind of the perspective, which is probably something we weren't expecting, but that's usually the way the media looks at Iran. We're not, again, because there isn't this passionate thing with Israel here, although Russia does have very good relations with Israel overall. There isn't this whole you must love, if you love Israel, you have to hate Iran. That doesn't exist here. It just doesn't. So I think that that's probably part of the reason. So yeah, so again, you're looking at three countries that never tell Russia what to do, don't threaten Russia, although of course the Chinese could. I mean, what could North Korea threaten Russia with? Nothing. But never make threats, even though the Chinese could. There seems to be a lot of mutual respect. So yeah, generally I would say that the overall opinion of these countries is positive, but I do think that all three of them remain a bit mysterious. I think in the media, we still get way more information about the way that people live in Western countries. We see that much more. Travel channels, and Russians, when they go on vacation, it's all Turkey, Egypt, Thailand. But of course, that's a tourist perspective. But I think of non-European countries, that trio has really started to affect maybe the Russian psyche a little bit. Because when I came here, there was no Thai food. Now, everyone has to have tom yum soup. If you don't have tom yum soup at a Japanese restaurant, you see, if you don't have tom yum soup at a Japanese restaurant, you're just a scumbag. Okay. So there's definitely some contact there. But again, it's this sort of touristy contact, and I don't think it's really providing something particularly deep. But the Russian passion for vacations is building. Cyprus is another one. I've been there twice. Cyprus is another place where this vacation culture has really built a lot of contacts. I also think, I swear to God, I think Russians might own 40% of Bulgaria. That's another hot thing. Buy a cheap apartment in Bulgaria because the languages are similar. And a lot of Bulgarians speak Russian, I guess through school. I don't quite know how. So Ironically, Russians' passion for vacation is the real contact point. And it's a real shame because China makes a lot of media. I don't know about North Korea. I don't know about Iran. I don't know what kind of media they have. It may be too restrictive in Iran about what's kind of accept. It just might not work for the Russian mentality. But it's unfortunate that some of our good partners and who we're willing to work with remain mysterious. We should, like every Russian's seen that show Friends, Sex in the Big City. What's something ubiquitous? All those Game of Thrones and
Rom-coms and all the
Breaking
romantic
Bad, all that
comedies.
garbage that I've never seen. Right, and it's a shame that we pour ourselves out over this a sort of informational culture from essentially countries that are always, they're politicians anyways, are very negative towards Russia, and yet we don't really get a lot from China. There's been some Russo-Chinese movies that have been sort of like joint projects together, but none of them succeeded, and it's just kind of a shame.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, I think as long as they can stay together, not attack each other, as long as we don't have another, Russia's Sino-Soviet split like we had in 1959.
Oh yeah, that's one thing that has definitely been acknowledged as a big. That has been a hugely acknowledged as one of the most massive mistakes in Russian history. The other one has been revolution.
Chinese also.
Yeah, it's been revolutions because essentially the Russian Revolution ultimately failed, and the costs of it were extremely high. And there's a belief that if we would have just not had the revolution, things probably would have worked out anyways. And of course, what happened in the '90s was a hellhole. So yeah, revolution bad, and the bad, the unacceptable to have bad relations with China. It's just not an option anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Tim, this has been super, super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experiences. Besides Tim Kirby Russia, do you have any other projects in the pipeline?
Yeah, I do a podcast called the Strategy Session. It may be a little bit hard to find for fans of Strategic Culture Foundation. You can find it on there. My buddy and I make it. Well, his name is Joaquin Flores, and they posted up there on Strategic, so you can see me there and find my writings there. I do a sort of tourism project called RTTT, Russia Tips, Tricks, and Travel, that has nothing to do with politics. It is, in fact, totally apolitical, but it's a lot of fun, and I get to travel across the country, and I'm very grateful for that. You can enjoy it. And I play for the Moscow Spartans in the Eastern European Super League, which is EESL.pro. For those of you, you can look on YouTube. Every match from like the last 10 years is there. If you are a fan, if anyone is a fan of American football, there's a whole Russian league that is just waiting for you. You've got plenty of content, plenty to watch, and yeah. So there's that. And my dream project.
Go ahead.
My dream project is hopefully going to come up if the government signs off on it. The government loves to give away free land here, and if they do give me the free land I want, I'm trying to build an American village, which will essentially be a community for English-speaking people who want to live in Russia, and we're going to kind of try to build this mini city where everyone kind of lives together. The only clause is got to be Eastern Orthodox because you got to have at least some tie to Russia, but getting converted is not very hard. And yeah, and even then, I think a lot of people are going to find a way around it. So, which is Russian tradition. So, anyways, hopefully this village will start this year. It's the project sitting on the governor's table. If he signs off on it, then we'll have a village, a little tiny, essentially city in Russia where everyone speaks English, which will be very interesting.
Maybe I can come visit.
We'd be happy to have you.
Speaking of football, you can see I've got my Oklahoma State Cowboys.
There you go.
Yeah. In Oklahoma, it's college football. So, yeah, I'm really impressed that you play American football. It's so unique, and most foreigners just can't figure it out. But it's one of the most exciting, I think, sports in the world. And anyway, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show, Tim, and thank you very, very much. And I will get this up probably before you get mine up.
Probably, yeah.
because you said you're going to be traveling
Yeah.
traveling soon. So anyway, thank you so much, and I'll give you the I'll give you the link and the video when I get finished editing it, and hopefully you can blast it all over the world, and I
Sure
will.
thing. My pleasure.
All right. Bye
Take
bye.
care.
China Rising Radio Sinoland and China Tech News Flash signing out. Please make a contribution to all of my hard work. Thank you.